University of Sanskrit, named after the great philosopher Sree Sankarajarya, established in 1993 and accredited with an A+ grade, has gathered here to celebrate Sree Sankarajayanthi. Our university celebrates Sree Sankarajayanthi every year, honoring Jagadguru Adi Shankara and his significant contributions to Indian philosophy, Sanskrit language, and celebrations with Sri Shankara annual lecture, endowment distribution, and various cultural events. With great pleasure, I welcome each and everyone to this auspicious occasion. Today, we have the distinguished guest, Professor Shivaji K. Panikar, former head, Department of Art, History and Aesthetics, MS University, Baroda, to deliver the Sri Shankara annual lecture on the topic Indianness in Indian Art, a retrospective interrogation. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M. V. Narayanan, will preside over the meeting. Endowments to students will be distributed by Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Vikhalakshmi. The program will commence with Sangeeta Sabani, a musical recital of Shankara Kritis. Once again, I warmly welcome all of you to this program. Let us begin with the Sangeeta Sabani, presented by our final SEM MA Music students Anjali S. Bhatt and Krishapriya S., accompanied by PhD scholar Amrita Lakshmi V. on violin and artist Dr. Manoj on mridangam. That was an awesome beginning to our celebrations. Thank you, Anjali, Krishnapriya, Amritarashmi, and Kotte Manoj for the mesmerizing performance. This year, our Sree Sankarajayanthi celebrations is conducted in two phases. And the first phase today, we are having two sessions, the morning session and the afternoon session. In the morning session, we are having the annual lecture and the endowment distribution. In the afternoon session, we are having the cultural programs of our students and staff. Now, to begin with the next segment, I would like to invite our dignitaries onto the stage. To start with the next segment of the session, I would like to invite the dignitaries to the stage. I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M. V. Narayanan, Honorable Chief Guest, Professor Shivaji K. Panikar, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Muthalakshmi, Registrar, Dr. A. V. Gopalakrishnan, and General Convener of the program, Dr. Srividya G, to come up on the stage and take their respective seats. Please be chaired on the stage.
ബഹുമാനിയെ ഭാരതീയ ദർശനങ്ങളിലെ ആദ്യപ്രയോഗങ്ങളിൽ സവിശേഷ സ്ഥാനം അലങ്കരിക്കുന്ന ശങ്കര ദർശനത്തിന്റെ ആചാര്യനായിട്ടുള്ള ശ്രീ ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ ജയന്തി എല്ലാ വർഷവും ഈ സർവകലാശാല സമുചിതമായി ആചരിക്കാറുണ്ട്. ഈ വർഷത്തെ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ദിനത്തിന്റെ സമാരംഭം കുറിക്കുകയാണ്. പ്രൗഢമായ സദസ്സിന് സ്വാഗതപ്പെടുന്നതിനു വേണ്ടി സർവകലാശാലയുടെ രജിസ്ട്രാർ ഡോക്ടർ പി ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ സാറിനെ ആദരപൂർവ്വം ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു.
നമ്മുടെ സർവകലാശാലയുടെ 2023 ശ്രീ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷങ്ങൾ ഇവിടെ ആരംഭിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞു. വേദിയിൽ സന്നിഹിതരായിരിക്കുന്ന ബഹുമാനായ നമ്മുടെ വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ ഡോക്ടർ എൽ വി നാരായണൻ സർ, ഇന്ന് ശ്രീശങ്കര ജയന്തി പരിപാടികൾ ഉദ്ഘാടനം ചെയ്യുന്ന ശ്രീശങ്കര ലെക്ചർ നടത്തുന്ന ആദരണീയനായ പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവാജി കെ പണിക്കർ സർ, ബഹുമാനിയായ വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ ഡോക്ടർ മുത്തുലക്ഷ്മി ടീച്ചർ, ജനറൽ കൺവീനർ ഡോക്ടർ ശ്രീ ടീച്ചർ, ബഹുമാനായ സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, സഹപ്രവർത്തകരെ, അദ്വൈത ദർശനത്തിൻ്റെ ആചാര്യൻ ശ്രീ ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ ജന്മം കൊണ്ട് പവിത്രമായ കാലടി എന്ന പ്രദേശത്ത് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ നാമധേയത്തിൽ കഴിഞ്ഞ 30ഓളം വർഷമായി ഉജ്ജ്വലമായി പ്രവർത്തിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ശ്രീ ശങ്കരാചാര്യ സംസ്കൃത സർവകലാശാലയുടെ 2023 ശ്രീശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷങ്ങൾ സമുചിതമായി ഇവിടെ നടത്തപ്പെടുകയാണ്. ഫിലോസഫേഴ്സ് ഡേ ആയി ആചരിക്കുന്ന ശ്രീശങ്കര ജയന്തി പരിപാടികൾ ഈ വർഷം നമുക്ക് പരീക്ഷാ തിരക്കുകളും മറ്റും കാരണം കഴിഞ്ഞ മാസം നടത്തുവാൻ സാധിച്ചില്ല. ഇന്ന് ഏറ്റവും ഉജ്ജ്വലമായ രൂപത്തിൽ ആ പ്രോഗ്രാം ഇവിടെ നടത്തപ്പെടുകയാണ്. ഈ പരിപാടിയിൽ അധ്യക്ഷത വഹിക്കുന്നത് നമ്മുടെ സർവകലാശാലയുടെ ആദരണീയനായ വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ ഡോക്ടർ എൽ വി നാരായണൻ സാറാണ്. ഔപചാരികതയുടെ പേരിൽ നമ്മുടെ വൈസ് ചാൻസലറെ ഈ പരിപാടിയുടെ അധ്യക്ഷ സ്ഥാനത്തേക്ക് സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇന്നത്തെ ഇന്നത്തെ ആനുവൽ ലെക്ചർ നടത്തുന്നത് പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവാജി കെ പണിക്കർ സാറാണ്. മുഖവുര അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആമുഖം ആവശ്യമില്ലാത്ത കലാരംഗത്തെ അതുല്യ പ്രതിഭയാണ് ശ്രീ ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കർ, പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കർ സാർ. നമുക്കെല്ലാം അറിയാവുന്നതുപോലെ അദ്ദേഹം ന്യൂഡൽഹിയിലെ ഡോക്ടർ അംബേദ്കർ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയുടെ ഡീനായി പ്രവർത്തിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു. അതിനു മുമ്പ് അദ്ദേഹം ബറോഡ MS യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിലെ പ്രൊഫസറായി സേവനമനുഷ്ഠിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. ബറോഡ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിൽ പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ചില നിലപാടുകൾ പത്രമാധ്യമങ്ങളിലൂടെ നമ്മളേവരെ ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചതാണ്. കാലഘട്ടത്തോട് നീതി പുലർത്താത്ത നിലപാടുകൾക്കെതിരെ സന്ധിയില്ലാതെ നിലപാടെടുക്കുവാൻ തക്ക ശക്തി തനിക്കുണ്ട് എന്ന് പല പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങളിലും തെളിയിച്ച മികച്ച കലാകൃട്ടിക്കും നല്ല എഴുത്തുകാരനും നല്ല കലാകാരനുമൊക്കെയായ ശിവാജി കെ പണിക്കർ സാറിനെ ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം ലഭിച്ചത് തീർച്ചയായും നമ്മുടെ ഭാഗ്യമാണ്. അദ്ദേഹം ഉജ്ജ്വലമായ ഒരു വിഷയത്തെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് പ്രഭാഷണം നടത്താൻ പോകുന്നു. ആ വിഷയം ഇന്ത്യൻനെസ് ഇൻ ഇന്ത്യൻ ആർട്സ്, എ റെട്രോസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് ഇൻട്രഗേഷൻ എന്ന വിഷയമാണ്. തീർച്ചയായും നമ്മൾ പ്രസിദ്ധിക്കുന്ന ഒരു പ്രഭാഷണമായിരിക്കും അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റേത് എന്നുള്ളത് ഉറപ്പാണ്. ഏറ്റവും ബഹുമാനത്തോടുകൂടി, ഏറ്റവും ആദരവോടുകൂടി ശ്രീ ശങ്കരാചാര്യ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയുടെ ഈ പരിപാടിയിലേക്ക് പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കർ സാറിനെ സാദരം സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാമിനോടനുബന്ധിച്ച് നമ്മുടെ സർവകലാശാലയിൽ ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ഒരുപാട് എൻഡോമെൻറ്റ്സ് വിതരണം ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. ആ എൻഡോമെൻറ്റ് വിതരണം നിർവഹിക്കുന്നത് ബഹുമാനിയായ നമ്മുടെ പ്രൊവൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ ഡോക്ടർ മുത്തുലക്ഷ്മി ടീച്ചറാണ്. ടീച്ചറെ ഏറ്റവും ആദരവോടുകൂടി ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാമിലേക്ക് സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഈ വർഷത്തെ ശ്രീ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷങ്ങളുടെ ജനറൽ കൺവീനർ, സംസ്കൃത ജനറൽ വിഭാഗത്തിലെ മുൻ അധ്യക്ഷ കൂടിയായിട്ടുള്ള പ്രൊഫസർ ഡോക്ടർ ശ്രീ ടീച്ചറാണ്. ടീച്ചറെ ഏറ്റവും സ്നേഹത്തോടു കൂടി ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാമിലേക്ക് സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാമിൽ പങ്കെടുത്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാമിൽ നമ്മുടെ ക്ഷണം സ്വീകരിച്ച് എൻഡോമെന്റ് ഏറ്റുവാങ്ങാനായി വിവിധ വിദ്യാർത്ഥി ഗവേഷകർ എത്തിച്ചേർന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. എല്ലാവരെയും ഏറ്റവും സ്നേഹത്തോടെ സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. നമ്മുടെ ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട സിൻഡിക്കേറ്റ് അംഗം മണിമോഹൻ സാർ എത്തിച്ചേർന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. ബഹുമാനരായ അധ്യാപക സുഹൃത്തുക്കൾ, ബഹുമാനരായ എൻ്റെ സഹപ്രവർത്തകർ, വിദ്യാർത്ഥി സുഹൃത്തുക്കൾ, മാധ്യമ പ്രവർത്തകർ, എല്ലാവരെയും ഒറ്റ വാക്കിൽ സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് യോഗത്തിൻ്റെ അധ്യക്ഷ സ്ഥാനത്തേക്ക് ആദരണീയനായ വൈസ് ചാൻസലറെ ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു.
Very good morning to all. We live in a very curious age in the sense that the idea of the nation is quite foremost in our thoughts, in our discourses, in our writings, and in practically what we do in our everyday life. The idea of the nation, whether it be in art or literature, or in any kind of articulation, seems to be a major bone of contention. One might even say that it is the obsession of the time. Are we Indian? Are we non-Indian? Are we anti-Indian? Are we any of such definitions, or are we something beyond? This is a question that seems to actually plague most of our discourses, probably also because of the very clear interventions of the state in the day-to-day activities of its citizenry. But curiously enough, this was not always the case. There have been times, especially in the classical ages, when art and literature, or any kind of articulation for that matter, even when it was connected to and focused on the locality, on the immediate experience, on the reality of the surroundings, was not probably so consciously aware or consciously concerned with the question of what nation, what community that you were part of. Inevitably enough, the place an artist is located in, the space an artist is located in, will have its bearing, will have its unconscious imprints upon the way in which she or he articulates or expresses. That is inevitable. But at the same time, a kind of consciousness about that particular kind of articulation was probably not uppermost in the writings or in the expressions in most of the historical ages that we look at. I wonder if Kalidasa ever thought of whether he was writing about India. Or even Shankara, he whether thought he was writing about India or about the world in general. I wonder if some of the greatest artists that lived in the earlier ages ever wondered or was conscious of the question of whether they were Indian or not, or whether they were Keralite or not, whether they were Maharashtrian or not. If you look at the work of, say, people like Michelangelo or some of the great European artists, they probably had a very narrow sense of the world, but it was the world that was present in their expressions, even while critics will be able to discern in them clear localities, clear spaces, clear kinds of inscriptions of the kind of world in which they lived in, the kind of context in which they lived in. But probably a curious aspect of our lives is that, especially after colonialism, and especially in the post-colonial context, it has become rather imperative as part of the struggle against colonialism, as part of redefining our own selves, our subjectivities, in terms of a newfound identity. It did become quite important for many communities, artist communities as well as other communities, to actually talk about their own placement, their own location, and be consciously aware of that while they were doing that. One aspect that I have in mind is a movement of negritude in Africa, where in the initial instance led by Leopold Senghor and a number of other intellectuals of the African Renaissance consciously thought of themselves as African and tried to bring in not just subjects, but also subjectivities which they thought were quintessentially African in nature, in an attempt to bring themselves out of the yoke of the British or the French or the Spanish colonial imagination. Something similar has happened in our country too. Given the fact that we have our own indigenous movements of art, indigenous movements of theatre, in all of which, more than the question of actually addressing the immediate realities, there was also the question of the immediate subjectivities. There was also the question of defining one's own art, the style of one's own art, in terms of its difference from other forms of art, in other places, in other times, in other climates, and in other nations. Now, the topic that Dr. Shivaji Panikkar is going to talk about today is about Indianness in Indian art. In one sense, it is a very redundant topic. Once you speak about Indian art, it has to be Indian, one would say. But what is that concept of Indianness? How has it changed over the decades or the centuries? What kind of implications does it have in terms of a contemporary life? And whether the kind of Indianness that we are laboring with, or shall I venture to say that we are burdened with, has it been the same even before? Or has there been substantial and significant changes, shifts in the landscape of such thinking and such expression? Probably there is no other person more, shall we say, qualified or more equipped to speak about this subject than Dr. Shivaji Panikkar. When I asked him, invited him for this, he was very happy in coming. And he was a bit skeptical about the topic. He said, it's something that is over. We probably need not talk about it much. Because he was looking at it from within the province of art itself. But when I conversed later and continuously about the issue that is plaguing us today, he said, it's not something that I've worked upon, but something that I may like to take up. And so, in one sense, we are waiting for a lecture that I'm sure will probably turn out into a well-researched article or paper at a much later point of time. So we are honored to be part of the thinking process of Professor Shivaji Panikkar, who has, in his time, continuously and consistently intervened in the discussions on art in the country. As Dr. Gopalakrishnan has mentioned, he has been in the news. I'm sorry for the wrong reasons. But there, in a certain manner of speaking, it was not fame sought after, but fame thrust upon him, where he was not going out to make a point, but he was actually forced to make a point in standing up for art, in standing up for the right of expression. I shall not speak more. I shall definitely just say this. Dr. Panikkar, we are extremely honored to have you here, and we look forward to your lecture as part of the Sankaracharya lectures. We have had a history of such eminent academicians and intellectuals giving lectures and topics of utmost interest to the contemporary times. And this will be another chapter in that long history. We look forward to your lecture and welcome to you.
Thank you, sir. Now it's time for the most awaited event of the session, the Shankara Annual Lecture. Today we are having Professor Shivaji Panikkar to deliver the lecture on the topic Indianness in Indian Art, a retrospective interrogation. Professor Sree Sankarajayanthi is one of the foremost art historians of the country. Having taught for over 35 years, he was the head of the Department of Art History and Aesthetics at the University of Baroda from 2000 to 2007. He contributed in forming the vision of the School of Culture and Creative Expressions, Ambedkar University, where he was the dean from 2011 to 2014. His major contributions to art and literature include Saptamatrika worship and sculpture, and iconological interpretation of conflicts and resolution in the storied Brahminical icons. 20th century Indian sculpture last 2 decades. He also coordinated towards a new art history, studies in Indian art, etc. He is also the founder of the research institution, Center for Art and Society, Baroda. We are extremely privileged to have such a great academician and artist to deliver the lecture. On behalf of the university, I cordially invite Professor Sree Sankarajayanthi to deliver the lecture and enlighten us with his knowledge. Thank you, sir.
തുടങ്ങട്ടെ തുടങ്ങട്ടെ ഓക്കെ I'm confused actually whether to say dear all or dear university. I'll just say dear all. It's always a great pleasure coming back to Kerala. And I'm very thankful to Professor M.V. Narayanan to invite me to this university. This university is very special because the name from which this university is built evokes that kind of awe in us. There is a certain deep respect that you have. Along with that, what I have gained in my life, my criticality, I would say, enables me to kind of think somewhat doubtfully about its very naming. But I'm not objecting. I'm not putting up my, protests in the beginning. But I would like to think about it. That's my right. We may all think together is also a possibility. So one of the aspects that I'm going to kind of concern myself with is the critical possibility of thinking about Indianness. I will possibly be stressing this critical aspect of art thinking as such. But before that, let me also mark how beautiful it was to sit and listen to the music, the song, the compositions sung by your music students and played on mridangam and violin. My day always starts with music. And today I had no time to listen to music because I was still busy preparing for the presentation. And this was a good beginning, and I thank for that presentation. I'm also thankful to, apart from, of course, giving me a space to speak and inviting me, also the kind words that were said about me in the beginning. Now, without much ado, I would like to go to my presentation. And its title, as you can see, it is Indianness within quote unquote Indianness, the so-called Indianness, because we are still, like Professor Narayan pointed out. In fact, you actually gave a very good introduction to my presentation, because you set a kind of a platform for me to kind of to begin a dialogue about the topic. So I'm not calling it Indianness as it is, but it is quote unquote Indianness in Indian art. It makes a lot of difference as far as when you put it in quote unquote. What do you call Indianness to be? What is it that you call Indianness to be? And another term that is very significant in this title is interrogation. Now, it sounds like some police interrogation. I was doubtful whether to have that word. It really sounds like you're standing on judgment on something that has happened, right? Or trying to find out something hidden, something what we do not know, right? So retrospective makes it a little better. That's because we, as historians, would like to kind of look back. Always we are looking back. Hindsight is the kind of spirit from which I speak about this topic. Now, Professor Narayan has already pointed out that I had certain resistance to kind of pick this topic up, because it's something that I have concerned myself throughout my life. I mean, right from the time of my interest in art began, because I kind of belonged to a time where Kadambanita was writing poems, or Kavalam Narayana Panikar was, doing his play, Aravindan was doing his cinema, etc., in Nava Kerala. So always there was this question of tradition and tradition and tradition. Another, we call it in Malayalam, another. But that quest, that process of finding out what is this Tanada has made me actually travel quite a bit in concepts, in thinking, and also experiencing various facets of it. So it cannot be actually said as one monolithic thing. Right at the outset, let me say that the so-called Indianness in singular is a misnomer. That we have to think about it in multiplicities in terms of its varied kind of forms that it has evolved throughout the 100 years of, at least minimum 100 years of history that you have. So I have to see this visual. Now, what do I do? I have to see my projection. Sorry, this is not thought about. Usually I have my laptop here, so that's how it is done. But I think I suppose we can make the adjustment here. Now you have to adjust there. Fine, I can't read it now. I'm so sorry. കുറച്ചും കൂടി തിരിച്ചാലോ കുറച്ചുകൂടെ Okay, now you adjust the screen. ഇപ്പോൾ പിന്നെ വളഞ്ഞു Screen is okay, I can read it. About technical problem. Best would have been actually if the laptop is placed here. You can extend it till here. Brother, just a minute. Take 2 minutes. Slide change വേണ്ട കോപ്പി ചെയ്തതല്ലേ പെൻ ഡ്രൈവ് എവിടെ വേണമെന്നില്ല ഞാനിവിടെ നോക്കി Okay, now I think we are. I'm sorry. നേരെ വെച്ചോളൂ സ്ക്രീൻ ചെരിഞ്ഞായിരിക്കും താഴേക്കാക്കും മിഡിൽ വെക്കും കുറച്ച് I'm sorry, the presentation as such is a little too long, so I'm a little worried now. But you can stop me if we are crossing the time, right? And we should also have some time at the end to have a discussion, right? So I was saying that the idea of Indianness is somewhat more than 100 years old, and as pointed out already by Professor Narayanan, that decolonizing is its imperative. Its main, purpose of talking about it or thinking about it is is the aspect of how to decolonize ourselves from the 200 or 250 years of colonial, takeover. Now, we had been defining, constitutionally, we had been defining our nationness, our Indianness as in terms of democracy, justice, dignity, and liberty. Sometimes it has worked as a reappraisal or a redeeming of the values that survived colonialism. That's why Indianness is often associated with revivalism. Above all, I would suggest that we think that Indianness is thought in terms of practicing constitution that guarantees. In our case, particularly, it is multi-religious, multicultural, multi-everything, this country that we think about our constitution in terms of dharma that guarantees dharma nirapekshata or sarva dharma samabhavana. That is, these are kind of values that are so much valuable and enshrined in our constitution, which we in short call as secularism. Now, secularism might mean something else somewhere else. Secularism might mean certain other things elsewhere. A state without religion, probably, in other countries. But here it has been defined as equality among all religions is one aspect of our Indianness. There are many purposes and contexts in which the idea of Indianness has come up. It worked differently in different contexts, I would say. First and foremost, as it has been already pointed out, is the purpose of its decolonizing or anti-colonial or nationalist strategy. So you can count from all nationalists who were involved in defining Indianness. In the post-independent period, once you got the independence and nationhood, then the idea of Indianness was more closely associated with the idea of resisting Euro-American hegemony. Because India considered itself as third world country in relation to the first and second world. So a resistance against hegemonic political and social cultural discourses of Euro-American power. A third point that is of significance is that the idea of Indianness established a certain sense of nation's cultural identity against all other national identities. So India had to have its own kind of cultural capital and its own cultural production. Another project of Indianness project had been how to revive the dying or dead traditions, how to kind of bring it back to life, give it a new life, lease of life, you can say. Now, traditions, a fifth point to be taken note of is that traditions worked in terms of references so as to mark various differences, various critical differences, because the moment you defined one thing as Hindu or Muslim or on the basis of any caste, you needed to have other considerations too. So, as a marker of difference, Indianness worked. Or on a more formal basis, just on a stylistic basis or a formal basis, just to innovate various pictorial or performative practices is an aspect, like how do you revive something, how do you recreate something, how do you recreate traditions. These are various aspects. But as far as visual art is concerned, as far as India is concerned, much of 20th century Indian art has continuously swung itself between international modern, or what is called as Euro-American modernism, and or what we also call as avant-garde, the forerunners of modernism, modern art, you can say. And it is against which that indigenous traditions or the nativist traditions had to kind of perform. So we have here two works. One is the initiator of the international modernism, Rabindranath Tagore, on this side, and KCS Panikkar on the other side. Both actually were proponents of kind of internationalism. You can see very definite affiliations to Impressionism and Expressionism in both these cases. So they were directly, there will be a reference to KCS Panikkar later in the presentation, and we'll see that. Now, we have two other examples of this international modernism. I have to bring in this international modernists because it's against this that the indigenous modern is defined. The first one is by N.S. Bandre, who was the pedagogue, who was a founder pedagogue of Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda, very significant art teacher. Now, the second one is by Ram Kumar, on the other side. You know, abstraction had been the most significant 20th century development as far as modern Western art is concerned. And here we have a direct adaptation of these modernism in the works of Ram Kumar, who had been a very, very significant modernist. Now we have two other, one is a sculptor, Shankar Chaudhary, who has also absorbed this international modernism in sculpture. You have the simplicity, you have the abstraction, you have figure as merely as a reference, not as representing a woman. Similarly, K.K. Habbar, another bearer of internationalist modern. Now, these two artists, it's very important to kind of take note of what was the kind of international modernism that has been adopted by Indian artists. Now, it is here that certain criticality has to kind of come. In a marginal location like that of India, art styles were adopted from the West. You can also call it imitated from the West as readily available stylistic formats. And they were developed in India through part of academic education, unlike the modern Western art that developed as part of revolution, the avant-garde revolution that happened in the West. They were rebelling against the neoclassical forms or the classical forms. Modern artists' history is very different from ours. So here it was taught as part of, modern art was taught as part of academic training. It did not have, none of these art styles that you find in the international modern Indian art, you find a philosophical perspective or basis. They were simply imitated. The styles borrowed from the West was merely techniques that were imitated. They could be called as mere stylistic formalism. This is a kind of terminology that we use. So these two examples and the previous two examples are good. It's against this that you have an array of indigenous experimentation, that you have Mrinalini Mukherjee, the first one on my side. You have Meera Mukherjee. See, the first one is actually made of hemp, Indian material. The other one is Dokra casting. The second one, Mrinalini Mukherjee. You have Janaki Ram of South doing also much like our temple, Vigraha, the kind of Utsav Heras. We have Kanai Kunjaraman, our own, artist, who has looked at Teyyam Tira, etc., and has brought in. These are some. So these linguistic changes from the modern Western importations and the local developments here, like as these examples would say, there are many more examples. I have just chosen few examples. These differences between various kinds of international modern art and art that explored Indianness is very, very crucial. It is in the linguistic change or difference that we read quite a bit of meaning. Now, I would like to quickly kind of shift to a kind of situation today in the context of vibrant globalism. and new internationalisms that has come about. Say, for instance, new internationalism like Binale, for instance. It appears to be irrelevant to engage with the question of modernist traditionalism as such. We will come to explain why so, but just to have a look at these few examples that I'm showing here, at a worst kind of situation, today it has the so-called Indianness that Indian artists have strived has fallen into the trap of easy marketing strategy, or as obvious and unproblematic sign of an essential Indian identity. That certain thing can stand for Indian identity. This kind of a reading that has come about, especially to be formed, they are framed and exhibited largely for the foreign consumption because West expect India to have its identity. Again, this point will be discussed later. So, starting with a true quest for Indianness, today it has actually fallen into a kind of a decorative, superficial, a kind of art which otherwise should be engaging with more serious issues, more concerns that has greater validity in the society, has now come to reduce itself to a kind of a strategy for making essential Indian identity that you can simply kind of manipulate some kind of formal thing. Now, another tragedy that I'm going to take you to, another or even worse than that, is that the entire secular discourse that we have, initially talked about, we began talking about Indian secular tradition. The Indian secular tradition of Indianness can be seen completely being appropriated, completely being hijacked by the right-wing agenda of monolithic, upper caste, Brahminical, hard and fast, intolerant. These are mostly notions of pure essence of India, and Indianness. We will also kind of discuss this point. I think we will discuss that soon after this. Now, it is very curious. I'm going to give you some examples of how Puritanism or the Indianness, Puritanical aspect of Indianness works. Now, for instance, initial clamping down by the right wing of art and artists has fallen upon a Muslim, a modernist gentleman, a grand old modest pioneer, modest in his behavior, in his morality, in his artistic expression, artist namely Emma Hussain. This is a very, very targeted, calculated, targeted kind of. So this is how a certain secularist idea, notion of Indianness have been subverted by the right wing. This turnaround of the interpretation of Indianness in these events indeed are crucial. I would call it cruel. It is crucial, very important as far as our history is concerned, but it's also cruel, ironical turn of history. It's an ironical turn of history, perhaps less or least anticipated by many of us, most of us. We never imagined. I include myself in that minority, secularists of the nation state. We never thought that it is going to kind of develop into that scale. Now, it is Emma Hussein's painting that allegedly hurt the religious sentiments of Hindu nationalists beginning in 90s. Now, this is the painting, this is the drawing that he had made in late 60s. This is called Saraswati. This was created in 1970 and published in an issue of Vichar Mimamsa in Hindi monthly magazine with the article headline, very important title, Emma Hussain, a painter or butcher. A butcher is somebody whom you associate with a particular religion, right? So that is how actually they entered into the public discourse. 8 criminal complaints were filed against him. In 2004, Delhi High Court cancelled out these complaints, saying that these kind of controversies promote enmity between different groups. A painting of Durga goddess or Durga and Saraswati was leading to kind of a Hindu fundamentalist group to kind of create, enabling kind of creating controversy, and so these cases were actually removed. This particular article that I earlier referred to as a painter or a butcher, Emma Hussain, has profiled him as a culprit, as a wrong painter, as a great bigot. In a collection of painting that this article had put up a collection of painting, a series of Hindu gods and goddesses in sexually suggestive poses. This is an interpretation of Hanuman by Emma Hussain, and you see this interpretation that Hanuman, with his erect genital, I mean, I don't see actually a genital, it's only a shade of color that you see on his dhoti, right? It is pointed towards Sita, as Sita and Rama are indulged in passionate possession. That is that's the way the right wing interprets this particular painting. So, I mean, I'm just saying that the creative freedom that the artist takes, a ferocious lion and a naked Durga. Modernism do not allow you to show all parts of the body of any object. So Hussain is also practicing that. Now here, a naked Durga looking united with this lion, or Sita, Ravan, and Hanuman. Nudity is a major issue. Abduction of Sita by Rama. This was also illustrated. This is Hanuman escaping with Sita after Lanka Dahan, and Sita is clinging to the Hanuman's tail, almost suggesting a sexual urgency, according to the accord. Now, blasphemy is indicated in this work where a Brahmin is shown naked, whereas a Muslim is fully clothed. In this particular painting, Hitler is shown naked. The last one on that side, holding a skull. Gandhi is, of course, decapitated. I mean, for Hussain, it was not necessary. From Rodin onwards, in art, you need not have all part of body in representation. But right-wingers don't understand that. And nudity here, actually somewhere in an interview, Hussain had said that why he is making this Hitler nude is to humiliate him. Now, that is actually the point that the right-wingers picked up. And they said that this nudity, if he is showing nudity to represent Hitler in a derogatory sense, how can he show nude gods and goddesses? Or how can he show a nude Brahmin? So it's only kind of very limited reading that they wanted to. So in 1998, Hussain was attacked. His house and installations were attacked. His gufa in Ahmedabad was vandalized. Bajrang Dal was initiated, had been in the lead for this. Not only in England, many exhibitions of Hussain was closed down. Another controversy that erupted was 2006 in February, that so-called obscene image of Bharat Mata by Emma Hussain. They claimed that a Muslim had offended the religious sentiments of Hindus. This is that particular painting. Some of you may be knowing this work already, but just as a reference, I'm showing this. The painting was described by the right wing as nude goddess and demanded restraint to freedom of expression. Now, I'm actually trying to kind of bring in 3 points of view. One is the right wing point of view, artist point of view, of course, you can understand, but legal point of view is very important. So also art critics' point of view, artists and art historians' point of view. It's after this Bharat Mata that was taken up, the largest Hussain scandal following 1998 happened in 2002 and 2004. Many cases were registered against him. There was a systematic campaign against Hussain in 2006. There were several acts of vandalism and threats of violence. As a result, he had to flee the country. Main focus was the legal prosecution in the courts. Over 1,250 cases were registered against him under 3 sections: obscenity, offending religious sentiments, and inflammatory speech. Only 7 of these were fought in the court out of the 1,250 cases. The principal judgment came out in May 2008 was in favor of the artist. Very interestingly, the legal judgment is a great victory for the secularist. Vandalism and protest, however, vandalism and protest continued at this exhibitions. He was not allowed to exhibit anywhere in the country, even after court verdict had come in a positive way. As most of you know, that Hussain lived in voluntary exile from 2006 because of the life threat that he has faced. He lived in Qatar and London until his death in 2011 at the age of 95. A man who has labored for Indian art, who has worked from a very humble beginning, who came up and established a credo for value for Indian art all over the world, who was a torchbearer of modernism. He had to die his death in a foreign country, who could not really come back to India. Now, it is very curious that, it's a point that we'll come to later actually, that even despite the fact that he had a good, very positive verdict from the court, art world was silent. Art world did not even celebrate his success or the victory. That was the kind of failure that concerns us. Vandalism and restrictions continued about him. Now, we'll go to these points that Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul has made. He described the painting as made by an accomplished painter, practitioner, who depicts India in an abstract and graphical representation of a woman in nude with her hair flowing in the form of Himalayas, displaying her agony. That's how he described it. I'm actually quoting this in the judgment. Court very significantly argued that Bharat Mata was not coined by Hussain. And so what led to the case was not the responsibility of the artist, the court argued. Now, this is very important. The lawyers maintained that nation is neither sacred nor Hindu. Very important to take note of this. And belief in a concept of Bharat Mata, note that she is a concept. This idea, it's an idea, not a goddess. It is not limited to Hindus alone. Very significant point underlined. So offense cannot be claimed on behalf of Hindu community. This is the kind of argument the court gave. In the context of obscenity charge, Hussain's lawyers argued that nudity is relatively mild, stylized, and hardly graphic anatomically or precise. There are much more vulgar representation of women in terms of sexuality. Go and catch them if you are interested. But not this kind of very schematic, sketchy representation. So Kaul's judgment stressed art and emphasized art's social and aesthetic value. Artist's right to be autonomous, to be doing his art as he or she likes. There is a freedom of expression. Art as quote unquote vehicle for personal expression, the court also recognized then. Art's power derives from the artist's emotional connection to his perceptual reality, how he perceives or how she perceives life, how he or she wants to represent it in life, in art. So, Court argued that expression places modernist art firmly within the formation of the secular. These definitions that the court gave about in the context of Hussein is applicable to what we call as secular nations' values. So, thus, Hussein actually stood as secular understanding of artistic subjectivity. Now, for art critic, now coming to another aspect, facet of this discussion, Hussein was an embodiment of the connection between the past and present. Because Hussein brought past to the present, artistic tradition to modernism, and to individual to nation. These connections that he established, his value as an artist is because he relied a lot on tradition and brought it to the modern sensibility. He brought past to the present, or he brought tradition to modern situation. And as an individual, he brought it to the nation's identity. So these are kind of things that he was an artist who is formed by, very much grounded in Nehruvian vision of national development. I would argue that it prompted assertion of an artistic subjectivity in which artist's agency is central. Nobody says that art has to be imitative, art has to kind of follow something that is already established. But artist's subjectivity and agency is very important as far as modern art is concerned. So this is established, this is also asserted by Nehruvian thought. Secularism, particularly in the time of Nehru, emphasized the active transformation of multifarious Indian tradition. Very important. It believed in active transformation of multifarious Indian tradition. Nehru did not argue the status quo, maintain tradition as it is, as a fossil, but into a new shaded mode of belonging that could transcend the religious and other identities. So he washed art away from its religious, content and religious uses. So this is a very significant modernist view. So when you see a Nataraja figure in the museum, do you see go and worship there? No. That is because we are seeing it as a modern object of art, right? So that's the kind of modernism that we have developed. We can multiply this into various things, where a ritualistic dance like Bharatanatyam was performed in the presence of the temple, has been taken on to the for the sake of doing it. They might do some puja, or they may bring in the gods' names, etc. But what you are seeing is actually not a religious practice. Now, according to modernism, modernist citizenship also worked against all mediating identities like caste, religion, or region that came between a citizen and nation state. Whereas the Hindu fundamentalist forces agenda of destroying the secular basis of India is well manifest in the case of Hussein. Hussein's case is actually because it's kind of very prolonged, and it was argued in the court, and that established certain valuable, judgment. It has brought out certain valuable judgments. It's very important to study. Now, there are other cases. I'll just kind of refer to them. It's this film called Deepa Mehta's Fire, which was released in 1996. But immediately the first homosexual film showing love or sexual relation between two women, and in 1998. So, then and there itself, the right-wing activists intervened, vandalized, and stopped screening of the film. Now, why this was done? Because it's in the words of the Chief Minister of Maharashtra at that time, Manohar Joshi, who said that I congratulate these vandalizers for what they have done. The film's theme is alien to our culture. What is our culture then? Right? So there is no right of a same-sex loving couple as far as India is concerned. If that is the position, it's alien to India. Whereas there is a book that has been brought out by Salim Kidwai and Ruth Vinita, that same-sex love in India since Vedic times, bringing out all literary sources. So ignorant politicians anyway, it was again referred back to censor board for re-examination. There was one more incident that is of significance. Dilip Kumar was one of the producers of the film, and also Mahesh Bhatt. They submitted a 17-page petition in the Supreme Court asking for a sense of security to be provided to the artist. So there were petition referred to Articles 14, 19, 21, 25 of Indian Constitution, right to equality, life and liberty, freedom of speech, etc., etc., are referred. Now, it is against this that 60 Shiv Sena men stripped down to their underwear and squatted in front of Dilip Kumar. By the way, Dilip Kumar is also a Muslim, to protest because he supported fire. So this is a kind of expression of right wingers. So the screening actually began. We began in 80 again, but 100 members of BJP vandalized the posters in Surat as well as in Kanpur, despite a guarantee of protection from the commissioner. The film was re-released without any cuts, in 1999. Now, all this actually has a very crucial connection with this Babri Masjid demolition, right? In 1992, December 6th, India's one of the most important historical event that happened. So by this, actually, there is a total appropriation of Indianness by the extreme nationalist right wing. Many other events actually kind of happened. This is marked actually the kind of period of intolerance to difference and put across as a right wing's ideology as a totalizing ideology. Now it's against this context that you have something like a Dalit reaction that comes up. Now, if that is the right wing's reaction, so let me react this way to a situation. This is by Savi Savarkar, a Dalit, Maharashtrian Dalit, earlier on actually kind of this defiling of the Brahminical law of Manu Smriti and its author, Manu, gave rise to several threads. I mean, this is obvious. I don't have to explain this visual, right? This is Manu himself portrayed. And another Dalit artist who has also kind of questioned Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, for his Pune Harar, that he actually was not ready for giving a separate electorate for Dalits against the demand. So Pune Pact, the famous Pune Pact of 19. So here, the artist J. Nandakumar in 2010 shows Gandhi as trampling a Dalit and holding a Trishula in his hand, right? Obvious references to Hindu deities, etc., are there. Now, this was not allowed to be shown. This was taken down. So also, Savi Savarkar was several times attacked several times by the right-wingers. Now, so there is a kind of a major clamping down of expression of a Dalit against this kind of situation of the right-wingers. Now, I want to kind of refer to some other aspect of art making here and say that even in such stringent conditions of hate and kind of censorship, there had been significant dialogical and critical uses of tradition in the contemporary art productions by N.N. Rimzen, for instance, who is himself belonging to kind of a lower caste person. He brings in actually the traditional, very significantly, the images of Tirthankara, image of non-violence as that of image of Tirthankara juxtaposed against objects of violence or tools of labor in two examples by his 1992-93 works are very significant, very sophisticated kind of bringing of the tradition into discourse of art and also ideas. So also Surendran Nayar's use of traditional is very critical, autobiographical, autocritical. Critically looks at the male patriarchal body of himself. And the gendered religious identity also. I can't go into all the details of how he does this, but his strategy of subversion to today's political agenda. Who will guess that this figure on my side, he has made several of them. He is made after 1992, after the demolition of Babri Masjid. There are a lot of images in this image, which is referring to pickaxe and so a lot of violent tools that are used for dismantling a monument like Babri Masjid. Now, both these artists, I'm putting it together here, just as a contrast to Savi Savarkar and Nanda Kumar, show that how sophisticated, how calculated, how detached these very objectively presented artworks of Rimzen and Surendran Nayar. Now, this is a very important calculated move, very cerebral move that no right-wingers would be able to kind of track them down. They sell well in the market for their, great classicism. Now, earlier on, also you have artists such as Jogen Chowdhury and Bhupen Thakkar, who has used traditional images with transgressive intent. Who will buy this Ganesha? He calls it a kind of Marwadi Ganesha. In late 1970s, he painted a religious icon like Ganesha as a political allegory, which was comical and repulsive at the same time. It has a leathery kind of body and this kind of flabby body, skin, etc., etc. Now, so this was exhibited in 1970s, 81. Nobody kind of bothered. So also Bhupen Thakkar, who has very blasphemously kind of represented same-sex love in the context of Hindu mythology and Hindu worship places like Banaras, two men in Banaras, or Ram Bhakt Hanuman. I mean, these are kind of, he constantly drew images and ideas from Hindu practices. But he was also kind of went unnoticed. by the right-wingers. Now, it is in this context that Narendra Modi's government in Gujarat, that Gujarat is said to be the kind of BJP's laboratory, where Hindu nationalists took up the genocide of Muslims in 2002. It also unleashed attack on educational institutions, jeopardizing the institutional autonomy and freedom of expression. So these are some other kind of examples that we are talking about. In MS University itself, where I was teaching, one Mr. Neeraj Jain, a right-wing activist, a BJP worker, in 2007, with the support of media and police, both these actually was victim, barged into the university examination procedure, raised objections of a student's work, manhandled him and got him arrested. Then and there was no information to the dean or authorities. He came, caught the student, manhandled him, put him in the jail. The university authorities supported this thing. And vice chancellor, pro-vice chancellor, registrar, everybody. There's nobody who kind of stood for the student or for the institution. So this is Mr. Neeraj Jain coming with the media and the police. This is a good photograph of that time. Now, these are some images of the kind of vandalism and the kind of manhandling that shouting slogans, etc., Bharat Mata Ki Jai, etc., was in the air. These are the two. This is one painting, that one large wood block print that was blown out and put up in the exhibition. I don't know how clearly you can see. It's actually a image of Durga with multiple hands. You can see her Trishula, and the artist is being delivered by her. Artist's face is actually shown coming out of a vagina, and the Shula is actually kind of being pierced on him. Then and there, he's being killed. This is the image that was controversial. Apart from certain other images also, I'm not showing all of them. But this event actually led to a direct confrontation of Hindutva ideologues and artist community. This was one event May 2007-13 of May, where police van, you can see, is being used for displaying Ma Durga ka apaman, Rashtra ka apaman. Right? To relate it to the kind of previous slide that I showed you of Ma Durga. Ma Durga ka apaman, whoever can read Hindi there. Okay. And there was a direct confrontation on the road in front of Faculty of Fine Arts between the right-wingers and the artist community. Speak up for the autonomy and of education institutions. It was an examination procedure and nobody had the right to kind of barge in and kind of question. A student can do a mistake, even if it was a mistake. And that's in the hands of the examiners and the authorities, not somebody, some politician, stray politician who kind of barges in. So these are kind of views of how that confrontation was kind of. It was contained, it was kind of fizzled out, it did not really work out in any major way. But then that was one moment where artist community came out all over India, that came out in protest in support of an institution and for artistic freedom. So this is to sum up that a crucial, I would say actually a cruel, ironical turnaround of our noble secular history, so-called kind of secular history that we have built up over many decades. Perhaps this was the least or less anticipated by the minority secularists of today. Now, I would like to kind of pause here and say, despite this intervention and subversion by the right-wingers, we have to kind of look at history from a much larger perspective and with larger hearts, perhaps, not give up to this kind of sad situation that has emerged. But it's definitely an unfortunate turn of history, I would say. Secular nationalist traditionalism had been a very serious search, a site of very serious search, experiments and contestation. So we'll take the coming slides, we'll take note of these developments. Valid, as we said right at the outset, in its anti-colonial discourse and search for Indian modernist alternatives. Now, having said that, our criticality should also work here, that we are not kind of putting it on a pedestal and calling it the end of it. We have to call it the right name. It is an elitist tradition, this modernist secular tradition is an elitist, exploitative, patriarchal largely, because it kind of discriminates women and other communities, upper caste, non-upper caste communities, and upper caste oriented it had been practices. On the other hand, it has formed itself as a, despite all these kind of limitations, critiques that you have today with us, despite all that, this had been the most dominant tradition to reckon with. Even today, you cannot really cross the boundaries. You cannot just get an entry into art world. There are gatekeepers, very serious gatekeepers. You have to get an entry into a kind of market of art. You need a lot of. So I mean that we are not kind of putting our blanket on that aspect of its elitism, modernist, nationalist, secular elitism. But to start from the very beginning, now I'm actually going into a section which is more historical in its, in chronological order. So this will give you a kind of a picture of evolution. Now, Raja Ravivarma was the most anglicized person and artist of his times, right? He used Western art style of classicism into painting Indian goddesses, Indian gods and goddess mythology, etc. So he had been written off. He had been not valued until 70s or 80s as anybody important, because he was highly westernized, highly, so there was a certain stigma against Raja Ravivarma, despite the fact that he was collected and kept in the museums, etc., etc. Among art circles, he was not very much favored. But post 70s, you find that he is put in the context of national identity, nationalist identity, related to the idea of Indian nationalism. Because after all, he has painted Indian gods and goddesses. After all, he painted Indian subject matter, like in this case. You have highly modernized version of Nala and, Damayanti and Hamsa, as you can see. Still people, of course, in the people's mind, he is still the most favored artist. That's also a very important contrast. Now, before going further, I would like to say that there are two phases of modernist traditionalism. And first being the early phase, that period of starting from late 19th century through first half of 20th century, what we call as Bengal school or revivalism. These are two terminologies which are commonly used to describe this development. I'll show you the examples of that. Second is actually the post-independent period, 50s, more appropriately 60s onwards, generally called as nativist or indigenist approach, indigenous trends, which I mentioned earlier, that decolonizing was one of the criteria. Nationalist movement was actually part of revivalism. But in the second phase, it is more actually anti-hegemony, the Euro-American hegemony, the fight from the third world, from the point of view of, as pointed out, also Latin American kind of black movement, etc., etc. So Franz Fanon is one very important writer in that context. So it's widely read. Octavio Paz was read, actually, Latin American poet, etc. So that was actually two phases of this development. Now, I want to quickly say also that these indigenizing trends that had been happening in the Indian art scene, however, got shifted through 70s and 80s. It came to critical differences between the radical movements that came. I'm specifically referring to Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association, largely formed by Kerala youngsters in the 80s, started thinking in terms of premises of class, caste, gender, and sexuality. Today, if I am saying that the art world is elitist, it's actually coming from the radical perspective of the 80s. So also the idea of caste and the idea of gender also came into thinking in the 80s. So the question of Indianness somehow began evolving with greater contestations. Now, in other words, we started asking if violence can be Indianness. I mean, Bombay films show a lot of violence or this kind of thing. Underworld. Indian underworld is okay, is it? So there was a certain kind of questioning of this very blanket term of Indianness in the 80s, and a greater stress was actually more specific towards class, gender, and sexualities. Questions actually came. So the questions about Indianness began evolving greater contestation. That's what I would say. It's not that we left Indianness, but it came up with more contestations. But somehow, unfortunately, again, it got stultified or it got caught up in this right-wing uprising that happened since 90s, right? So we are actually more preoccupied today with the right-wing domination. Now, going back in time, Bengal school revivalism. Now, very ironically, very interestingly, that it is initiated by a European administrator, E.B. Haval, who was the principal of Madras College of Art for 12 years. Then he became Calcutta College of Art. In 1896, he became the principal of. It was very important that 12 years that he spent in studying Indian art. Although a British educator, E.B. Held. This is a portrait by Abhinandan Tagore, his student, and there were others who joined in, like Anand Kumar Swamy, a Ceylonese by origin, but who joined the club of Abhinandan Tagore or Hevel. Now, initially, the revivalist tendency that E.B. Havel initiated in the late 19th century was about imitating the tradition. I said that revivalism, the word revivalism, got stuck up because it was initial impulse was to kind of revive miniature painting, like the Pahadi miniature painting. This is a work by Abhinandan Tagore, and you can see that he is very much struggling to kind of imitate miniature painting. He can't leave behind his college education and the perspective and naturalism that he has imbibed from the art college, British art college. Another example is this passing of Shah Jahan, Rabindranath Tagore. But then, it's very important that the attempt in reviving or recreating the dead past or dead styles was impossible. That's why revivalism is impossible. Because I will come to that point a little later. But I also wanted to kind of bring in this Okakura Kakuso or tension. This is the kind of drawing by Nandalal Bose, student of Abhinandan Tagore, who has drawn. Nandalal Bose is seen himself drawing, and you have Gagnesh Tagore, you have Abhinandan Tagore, you have also Anand Kumar Swamy, the Ceylonese art historian, the first important Asian art historian, you could say. This was actually 1910. So this was actually a collaboration between these 4 or 5 people, E.B. Havel was sent back because of his anti-colonial activities. But already the idea of revival had caught on in India. So Abanindranath Tagore and his students became, Nandalal Bose and Vinod Bihari Mukherjee, became actively participating in this. Now, I've already pointed out that there is a distinction to be made between revivalism and quest for Indianness, because revivalism suggests any attempt in reviving the bygone art form. Much of Indian dance and music has been recreated, or I would say recreated, revived, they say, because you don't know about music and what existed in 18th century, how it was sung in 17th century, how it was done, how Bharatanatyam was done. You do not know how Mohiniyattam. So there is still Kathakali even, we do not know. Some very scanty photographs exist of the early 20th century. So we believe that whatever he is seeing today are traditional, but how much transformation it has gone through is history. There are people who have done research on Bharatanatyam, from Sadhir to Bharatanatyam, is very well known. So any attempt in reviving tradition is impossible. That is because in visual art particularly, since art styles happen in a context, in an organic, their art styles are organic entities like human beings. It cannot be willed into existence. You cannot simply kind of reduce it to techniques. And I mean, very good example that you have in front of you is the Guruvayur in Kerala mural tradition revival. Now it's time for you to sum it up. You have to find out how many decades have gone in after starting that institute. What their production, who are the artists, what are they doing, do they have, except some decorative kind of murals here and there or small objects that they are making. Are they making any mark in the art field? Are they being able to kind of work within the kind of contemporary anything? What about their contemporaneity? So it's very difficult. Sometimes it's possible that but anyway, murals also cannot be, in toto, cannot be recreated as it existed before. Now, as a result, what developed in Bengal in the early 20th century is the Indianness. In the name of Indianness, what developed was an eclectic synthesis of styles called as Oriental art, as against Occidental. That's why I showed you the portrait of Okakura, the Japanese cultural enthusiast who collaborated with Tagore, right? So they developed an idea of Asia or Orient against the Occident. Now, this is a large topic that needs at least 5 lectures for me to kind of fully elaborate. So at this point, please understand that there was a kind of a synthesis that was developed in Abanindranath Tagore. His Bharat Mata, which was originally called as Bangamata, is actually made of wash technique. It is not any miniature technique of Mughal or Pahadi or any other traditional styles, but it's his own invention, his own eclectic use of Chinese, Japanese wash technique combined with his own innovation. So tradition here is invented, right? This is what stood for tradition in the 20th century India. And Tagore, of course, played a very important role in intervening into this progress of traditionalism and established his Shantiniketan. This is another work of Abanindranath Tagore, End of the Journey. He brought in actually bhava, which is not very much part of the traditional painting. That's his modernist sensibility that is bringing in this aspect of expression in Abanindranath Tagore. Now, this is Abanindranath Tagore's student, Nandalal Bose, and this Taikan, a Japanese painter who was sent by, 2 painters were sent to India by Okakura Kakuso. This is Nandalal Bose's imitation of or taking up of the Abanindranath Tagore style, the Bengal school style. He had also incorporated his in his stylization the Ajanta murals. By then, they had studied Ajanta copied Ajanta murals. Now, he has a wide variety of styles that you can see: decorative style, Saraswati, Durga, etc., Ardhanarishwara, etc., etc. Nandalal Bose. He has also appropriated the folk traditions, as you can see. He is also one artist who has collaborated with Gandhiji in his Haripura Congress session. He decorated the pandal. He also painted the portrait of C.F. Andrews. You know why, obviously, why he has made it, the Congress, founder of Congress. There is also this interaction between Gandhi and Tagore. They had difference of opinion with regard to nation and national identity. Tagore did not really have. Tagore was a universalist and did not really believe in a kind of a national identity. To that extent, he was, by the time, actually he was an enthusiast for revivalism in the beginning, to begin with. But by the time it is third decade or fourth decade, he was completely relieved of that, and he became actually an internationalist, universalist. He said that art needs to be a free expression, so he brought in Western modern. He's the first one actually to bring a art historian who specialized in modern Western art to give lectures in Shalinigate in 1924. Stella Cramdish, some of you would have heard her name, great art historian who studied Indian art. It is Tagore. And Tagore also painted in his last years the German expressionist kind of painting, one painting I showed you in the beginning. So there is a difference of opinion. So on one hand, you see this Gandhian tradition of nationalism that is taken over by Nehru. But on the other side, you have this, kind of a universalism which most artists would like to kind of be part of, to think. And Nandalal Bose's student is Vinod Bihari Mukherjee, who had been also experimental in various ways. They were putting into practice the vision of Tagore, and Chinese, style is very, very much favored. He has also done murals of great importance. That is, of course, also showing the mural, the medieval saint, or the large mural that has been painted in, this is Kabir. So you can see the kind of Indianness, how it kind of travels. It's not exactly, because he's also looking at early Italian Renaissance art, and kind of, because Tagore encouraged a kind of internationalism in his Shantiniketan. He did not limit himself to national identity and nationalism in that sense. Now, our own times, we have A. Ramchandran, who is a student of Nandalal Bose, and who had been painting after his initial expressionist painting of the 60s, which brought out the kind of human violence, etc. He suddenly shifted into a kind of a style that is very Indian. Where does this Indian style originate from? You better find out. In any case, his art has. I asked this larger question, not only to him, but also these traditionalists, that how much contemporary you are. Are you able to kind of bring in any aspect of contemporariness in your work, or your works are merely objects of beauty? If they are only creating matter of beauty, then of course, yes, agreeable, right? But art has grown much beyond beauty. They are preoccupation about. So in that context, where do artists like A. Ramchandran stand is my question. Another artist who has tried to combine Indian and the Western element is Amrita Sehgal, a hybrid by her birth, who was brought up in Paris, who came to India in her 30s, had a very short career of 10 years, and studied Indian art. This is a oil painting reflecting Basholi style of Indian art. She's an eclectic. She definitely borrows things from Ajanta. She traveled in Kerala also. She has seen very many things, and she has tried to kind of bring, because she was trained in. Uh, shall I have 10 more minutes? Yeah. We have another artist like Jamni Roy, who has first time kind of taken up folk tradition. Now, it is in this context that you have to think about international modern. It's very interesting that K.C.S. Panikkar had an exhibition. I'm moving away now from the post-independent period. That 1954, he had an exhibition in London, and this architect there, Ludwig Goldscheider, who has passed this comment on him, wrote on him. He, in the I'm quoting here, has to go through the school of world arts, no doubt, but to become a genuine artist, he is not allowed to forget or suppress his racial and national way of seeing, feeling, and shaping. He has to be an Indian artist or nothing at all. So the idea of Indianness actually coming from European critique. In the end, his painting will be as different from all European art as the thinking of India. Upanishad, so India stands for Upanishads and Buddha as different from European thoughts, right? So no wonder that was India. There is a book by Basham. So India still has to kind of get caught up with as a kind of a traditional. So that's the idea. Significantly, K.C.S. Panikkar picks up his idea of Indianness, and he quotes this Goldscheider in his 1961 publication called Art Trends. Now, he says that there is evidence to show that Indian artist is already beginning to be conscious of the ultimate requirement that his art has to be expression of innermost spirit of the people, to be of any real value to the outer world. So, to be any value to foreign non-India, you need to be truly Indian. So this is actually the kind of pressure that you see at that point of time. So this is his own, K.C.S. Panikkar's own word. It is here that tradition and usage come again. Now his own work has moved into a two-dimensional flat, scribbling of words and symbols. I'm not going into describing that. It needs to be studied. So he claims that there is an Indianness there. In any case, Panikkar's initiative opened up an incorporation of regional techniques and forms of art to younger contemporaries. A large number of them came out. Kanai Kunjaraman, Radlappa Naidu, Nanda Gopal, Janaki Ram, and many more artists actually. What we call as Madras School originated from this in the 60s and 70s. Vishwanathan, Narayan, and many others, part of that. At certain other places, you have this neo-tantric art. This is by Santosh, but you have also Haridasan, etc., who argued that to be truly Indian, you need to be authentically Indian. So to be authentically Indian, you must do something like ritual, like tantric ritual. This has its own context that came out of the publication Tantra by Philip Rosen at that point in time. So that's another history that you need to kind of look at. Now there is this Delhi and Bhopal. You have J. Swaminathan, who began his career as a writer. He was an activist, left-oriented activist in the 50s, but he formed a group called 1890, and its manifesto argued against realism or Western formalist modernism. It rejected Ravi Verma as well as Bengal school. It set out indigenous ideological position. So J. Swaminathan is very important, who is also a kind of creator of Bharat Bhavan in Bhopal, right, in the 80s. So this was a kind of a discourse against the imperialist West. I'm going a little fast here. J. Swaminathan's discourse actually kind of gave rise to quest for Indianness, particularly in Baroda. Since many young artists like Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Jyoti Bhatt, Raghav Kanere, etc., transformed themselves from to train themselves in Western oriented art education, began looking for local. Don't say I've got dreams. So this is a work by J. Swaminathan. I won't go into analysis of what J. Swaminathan's work. It's very elaborate kind of thing. Another very important figure in the indigenous discourse is K.G. Subramanian, who was a pedagogue of Baroda, who stressed on craftsmanly skills and techniques of Indian craftsmen, influenced generations of students of Baroda. The only critique that has come up about K.G. Subramanian is by Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association, who called him a false patriarchal humanism of K.G. Subramanian. He was named and critiqued, right? So anyway, he was very influential as far as Indianness is concerned. Experimented with murals, reverse glass painting, toy making, children's book, a range of versatility that he has shown. So he actually had a certain philosophical position, starting with revivalism, because he's also trained in Shantiniketan. He was influenced by uh, um, our Anand Kumar Swami. So it's amazing. He rejected the Western notion of individuality and subjectivity in art. So that's how he stresses on craftsmanly skill. So he experimented like this on murals. Um, Now, as I mentioned quickly, I would go through this. Vrishchik is a journal that was published from Baroda. It is in this that Geeta Kapoor, one very important art critic, began her writing. The Vrishchik itself was edited by Bhupen Kakkar and Ghulam Sheikh. And she is the one who first kind of defined what is decolonizing imperative of the colonized, claiming dignity and liberty, Indianness as indigenism, mode of reappraisal and values of survival. So these are ideas that she has put forward. And very importantly, she said that while we are talking about indigenism, it has to serve some contemporary purpose. That was very important point, which is different from the revivalists Bengal school, right? So, and this actually had been very, very influential in the scene as a thinker and influencer. There is through 70s that this very strong thinking of what is a relevant contemporary Indianness. So Ghulam Sheikh has written in a catalogue that any discussion on Indian art has to essentially begin from the West, because we can't actually wish away West. We cannot reject West, because West had been certain, it had been very influential and had been very crucial. It has been largely, he says, that catalytic rather than decisive. So this is the first time in the Indian art that you find a reconciliation of this East-West dilemma, East-West conflict. West as not as somebody different. So starting from 70s, you find this development, and this is how they resolved it. They begin it like this: reconciliation of Indian identity in terms of hybridity. They are the people who actually asserted that hybridity is our identity. It is broken, it is impure, it is contradictory and multivalent. Artists came to kind of accept it in their. This is what actually irks the right wing mostly, because they want to hold on to something pure, something authentic, something traditional, something this and that. So both these paintings of the Sheikh and Bhupen Thakkar of the same time are reflective of each other. They bring in 2-3 different languages. Often it is said as postmodern in its idea. You have a portrait in the front which is more naturalistic, realistic, but you have a medieval background. You know, you have actually, in Shakespeare's painting, you have actually Persian miniature painting. Bhupen developed his hybrid style of popular Indian art in his painting, developed it very further. Some of his paintings are showing that aspect of Indianness in terms of hybridity. Sheikh, on the other hand, goes into more traditional miniature paintings and brings in, but it is not a narrow sense of traditionalism or miniature painting. He brings in various other things into his painting, including the Western. You can see, if you analyze his painting, you can see Renaissance, you can see 19th century, you can see multiple perspectives, etc. etc. Now, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh has been very significant and very important as an artist. Now, I want to present a critique of Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh here, without going into more elaborate discussion on his work. That I am quoting from K.P. Krishna Kumar, who was the leader of Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association. He says that, I quote, in the process of attempting to bring it all in the canvas, he picturizes it as transcendental and mysterious. This style rejects the human ability to face the problems, solving it and going ahead. Since profit is in the West, the focus is always on the Western audience, while avoiding all discussions on local and national issues. I'm thinking of it today. I realize that how silent an artist can be in terms of the contemporary reality. There is no one word that will come from somebody like him with regard to uh, what's happening around us today. Another very significant artist who has used tradition is Neelima Sheikh. I can't go into the detail. The major issue, like H. R. Ramachandran, is the inability to go beyond the criterion of beautiful. Not that she is not innovative. She uses the technique, scale, and medium, etc., in the most impressive way, Neelima Sheikh. But when it comes to the question of contemporaneity, especially the issues of violence, the tragic, the style proves to be inadequate. You know, this is a representation of this Heer Ranja, this folk story of you know, folk love story. Now, few points in conclusion. I have only two more slides. I'm sorry, stretching too much. That I can go on with more examples of artists such as Subodh Gupta, Sheila Gowda, Kallur, Rajendra Tikku, etc., who have based their art on Indian local traditions and materials. There are many number of artists who have used classical, pre-modern art, folk art, tribal and popular mass media art, etc., etc. Now, Subodh Gupta, as you can see, have used indigenous materials like cow dung to have identity, or stainless steel vessels, more contemporary identity of particularly coming from Bihar. Ritual hair in the case of Sheila Gowda, a traditional casting, traditional images by Kallur, and using appropriating tradition and intervening into that. We can't actually go into the more details of that. However, so I'm only suggesting that there are artists who are experimenting with all these kind of things from the tradition today. However, to my understanding, the anxiety to prove Indianness has ended in 1980. That is because when Indian artists reconcile with the fact that Indian hybridity or non-pure status of Indian culture, what we call as multiplicity, various, I think it is kind of constantly kind of forming and unforming, kind of evolution of us by imbibing things from elsewhere, by bringing in various things. It's the aspect of hybridity. I think that word is most useful. Certain assertion of self-confidence marks the period after 1980s. In the Indian art scene, there is a certain self-confidence, that sense of one criticism about Indian art had been that it's imitative. We got over that preoccupation or condition of. Further, Indian artists realized that any tradition of art at any part of the world could be part of us, like the world takes world into it, right? Like free, independent Indians, we appropriate anything from anywhere. Italian, African, Latin American, Chinese, anything is ours too. So, without having to rationalize it, why? What makes you kind of take anything from anywhere? You know, that's because you believe in that value. You appropriate. So, since 80s, you have a certain newly gained confidence. Eclecticism and freedom of choice is the main tenet, perhaps. It could be actually interpreted as a postmodern reality of the world today. Today, in the context of the most vibrant globalism and new internationalisms, appears to be irrelevant, like Professor um, Narayanan had already pointed out in the beginning, that is an irrelevant. I can kind of come back to my initial resistance that why talk about something irrelevant to even engage with the question of modernist traditionalism is the question that I ask to myself as an art historian. Should I bother about Indianness anymore? Is a question. Well, what brought me to this presentation and possibly an article or possibly a book in the future? And I forgot to mention that in the late 90s, I have written an article on indigenous Indianness in Indian art, or a descriptive article. After that, I closed that chapter. I did not look at that. I mean, this gave me a chance to kind of reopen that chapter. And now, at the end of the presentation, I realized that there is a possibility. He mentioned, Professor Vice Chancellor mentioned it as a possibility of a larger article, but possibly there is a possibility of a book in making in this concern that I shared with you. That is because the most dangerous threat lurking today, looming heavily, which already have made its impact on the puritanical narrow definition of Indianness, is the right wing. Is that where nothing can actually go in, nothing can penetrate, kind of thing. To which now, unfortunately, artists are hardly responding to that reality today. On the contrary, they are actually giving into that trend. I am referring to the latest incident in NGMA, National Gallery of Modern Art, where there's a curated show where Prime Minister walks in and all the artists kind of bend down, and including our Riaz Komu. I mean, just taking one artist. I'm not intentionally kind of bringing in that. But it surprises me why an artist has to do that. If it is, probably it's a point of contention, point of, I kind of keep it open still. I have not made any conclusion with regard to it. With that provocative conclusion, I end this presentation. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it was too long, but I had to. This is my usual way. നമുക്ക് വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് already it's 1 o'clock. Anybody has any question, please go ahead.
Probably ask later.
Yeah, it will take some time to sink in, and I also probably hunger.
We then move on to the next.
Yeah. Oh, you have to finish more program in the morning.
There's an endowment to be given.
Okay.
And a little honoring of youth.
Okay.
ബഹുമാന്യരെ, ഭാരതീയത രൂപപ്പെട്ടു വന്ന ചരിത്രവും സംസ്കാരവും അതിന്റെ വൈവിധ്യമാർന്ന നടനുകളിലൂടെ സഞ്ചരിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു ബഹുമാന്യനായ ശ്രീ പണിക്കർ. ഭാരതീയത കലാകാരന്മാർ നേരിടുന്ന വെല്ലുവിളികളെ കുറിച്ചും എംഎഫ്ഐയുടെ ജീവിതാനുഭവങ്ങളെ മുൻനിർത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് സവിസ്തരം പ്രതിപാദിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു നമ്മുടെ വിശിഷ്ടാതിഥി. പ്രൗഢമായ പ്രഭാഷണം നടത്തിയ ഡോക്ടർ ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കർക്ക് സർവകലാശാല നൽകുന്ന ആദരമാണ്. മെമ്മന്റോ കൈമാറുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടി സർവകലാശാലയുടെ ബഹുമാന്യനായ വൈസ് ചാൻസലറോടും വിശിഷ്ടാതിഥികളോടും അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. ഈ മെമ്മോ കൈമാറ്റത്തിന് ശേഷം ഈ വേദിയിൽ എൻഡോമെന്റ് വിതരണം നടത്തുന്നതായിരിക്കും. എല്ലാ ചടങ്ങുകളിലും എല്ലാവരും സംബന്ധിക്കണമെന്ന് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുക.
This is a work by Ranjit Shivaram. Putting it down. Ranjit Shivaram, pen and ink, A4 size. Let's see the data. He is doing his PhD in visual arts at the university.
Thank you, sir. അടുത്തതായി വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്കുള്ള എൻഡോമെന്റ് വിതരണം ചെയ്യുന്നതിനും മെസ്സേജ് നൽകുന്നതിനുമായി ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ കെ ലക്ഷ്മിയെ ആദരപൂർവ്വം ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു.
ടീച്ചർ സംസാരിച്ചു.
ഈ യോഗത്തിന്റെ അധ്യക്ഷനായി ആയ വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ, ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പ്രൊഫസർ എം വി നാരായണൻ സർ, ഏറ്റവും ചിന്തോദ്ദീപകവും വളരെ സമകാലിക പ്രസക്തവുമായ ഒരു ഭാഷണം നമുക്ക് മുന്നിൽ കാഴ്ചവെച്ച പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവാജി പണിക്കർ, രജിസ്ട്രാർ ഡോക്ടർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ സർ, എൻ്റെ മുന്നിലിരിക്കുന്ന ഏറ്റവും പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട അധ്യാപകരെ, വിദ്യാർത്ഥി സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, ഇന്ന് ഈ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ദിനത്തിൽ ഈ ഒരു പരിപാടികൾ നമ്മൾ സാധാരണയായി ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ദിനത്തിൽ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുന്ന പരിപാടികളുടെ ഒരു വൈവിധ്യം എന്നുള്ളത് തന്നെ വാസ്തവത്തിൽ എന്താണ് നമ്മളെ മുന്നോട്ട് നയിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു സമീപനം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എന്താണ് ഈ ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കർ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ എന്താണ് നമ്മുടെ ട്രഡിഷൻ, അതിലടങ്ങിയിരിക്കുന്ന വൈവിധ്യം, അതിലടങ്ങിയിരിക്കുന്ന കലർപ്പ് എന്നുള്ളതിനെയൊക്കെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള സൂചനകൾ തന്നെയാണ് തരുന്നത്. അത് ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ കൃതികളുടെ സംഗീതമായിട്ടാകാം, ഉപകരണ സംഗീതമായിട്ടാകാം, അതിനെക്കുറിച്ചുള്ള പ്രഭാഷണമായിട്ടാകാം, അത് ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ ചിന്ത നമ്മിൽ ഉണർത്തുന്ന പലതരം ചിന്തകളുടെ, അനുബന്ധ ചിന്തകളുടെ ഒരു പ്രതികരണമാവാം. അങ്ങനെ പല തരത്തിലുള്ള പരിപാടികൾ, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള വൈവിധ്യമുള്ള പരിപാടികൾ ആയിട്ടാണ് ശങ്കര ജയന്തി നമ്മൾ എല്ലാ വർഷവും സംഘടിപ്പിച്ചു പോരുന്നത്. ഇന്ന് പ്രൊഫസർ ശിവജി പണിക്കർ ഇവിടെ പറഞ്ഞ പലവട്ടം അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ സംഭാഷണത്തിൽ അദ്ദേഹം ഉപയോഗിച്ച ട്രഡീഷൻ എന്നുള്ള വാക്ക്, ഇന്ത്യൻനെസ് എന്നുള്ള വാക്ക്, ഇതെല്ലാം ശങ്കരാചാര്യ സംസ്കൃത സർവകലാശാലയിലെ അംഗങ്ങളായിരിക്കുന്ന ഇവിടെയുള്ള നമ്മളുടെയൊക്കെ മനസ്സിൽ നമ്മൾ ഓരോരുത്തരും പഠിക്കുകയും പഠിപ്പിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന വിഷയവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിരവധി ചിന്തകൾ നമ്മളിൽ ഉണർത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ടാവും എന്നുള്ളതിന് സംശയമില്ല. ഇന്നത്തെ ഈ ഒരു പരിമിതമായ ഒരു സമയത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കാനുള്ള സമയമില്ല. ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ കൃതികളിൽ അദ്ദേഹം ആവർത്തിച്ചുപയോഗിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വാക്ക് സമ്പ്രദായം എന്നാണ്. ട്രഡീഷൻ, നമ്മുടെ മലയാളത്തിലെ പാരമ്പര്യം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയും. ആ പാരമ്പര്യം എന്നുള്ള വാക്കിനെ കുറിച്ച് തന്നെ വ്യാകരണം അറിയുന്നവരുടെ ഇടയിലൊക്കെ വലിയ വലിയ പരമ്പര എന്നല്ല പറയേണ്ടത്, പൂർവപൂർവ എന്നാണ് പറയേണ്ടത് എന്നൊക്കെയുള്ള ശാസ്ത്രികളെ പോലെയുള്ള വ്യാകരണന്മാരൊക്കെ ഇങ്ങനെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്. ശങ്കരാചാര്യർ ഈ പാരമ്പര്യത്തിന് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ട്രഡീഷന് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന വാക്ക് സമ്പ്രദായം എന്നാണ്. അപ്പൊ ശങ്കരാചാര്യരുടെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും സമ്പ്രദായത്തിനെ അറിയുന്നവരാണ് ഒരു ലക്ഷ്യത്തിലേക്ക് നടന്നു പോകുന്നവർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പരിശ്രമിക്കുന്നവർ എന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ അർത്ഥം. പക്ഷേ ശങ്കരാചാര്യർ തന്നെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് സമ്പ്രദായത്തിനെ കണ്ടത്, എങ്ങനെയാണ് സമ്പ്രദായത്തിനെ അവതരിപ്പിക്കുന്നത്, ശങ്കരാചാര്യർക്ക് മുൻപുള്ള സമ്പ്രദായത്തിൽ നിന്ന് എങ്ങനെയാണ് ശങ്കരാചാര്യർ വ്യത്യസ്തനാകുന്നത്, ശങ്കരാചാര്യർ മുന്നോട്ട് വെച്ച സമ്പ്രദായത്തിൽ നിന്ന് എങ്ങനെയാണ് ശങ്കരാചാര്യർക്ക് ശേഷമുള്ള അദ്വൈതത്തിന്റെയും വേദാന്തത്തിന്റെയും ഒക്കെ ഉള്ളിൽ തന്നെ നിൽക്കുന്നവർ ആ സമ്പ്രദായത്തിനെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് സ്വാംശീകരിച്ചത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് സമ്പ്രദായം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് തന്നെ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ഏകശിലാത്മകമായ ഒന്നല്ല. ഇത് വളരെ ബഹുസ്വരമായ, കേവലം വേദാന്തം, സംസ്കൃതം, അദ്വൈതം എന്നുള്ളതിൽ തന്നെ ആ സമ്പ്രദായത്തിന്റെ ഉള്ളിൽ തന്നെ ഈ ബഹുസ്വരതയുടെ ധാരകൾ നമുക്ക് കാണാനായിട്ട് സാധിക്കും. അതിനെക്കുറിച്ചൊന്നും ഞാനിപ്പോൾ കൂടുതൽ പറയേണ്ട ഒരു അവസരമൊന്നുമല്ല. പക്ഷെ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും ശിവജി കെ പണിക്കരുടെ സംഭാഷണം നമ്മുടെ ഓരോരുത്തരുടെ ഉള്ളിലും അവരവർ ഗവേഷണം ചെയ്യുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന വിഷയവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിരവധി ചിന്തകളും വിവരണങ്ങളും ഉണർത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ടാവും എന്നുള്ളതിൽ എനിക്ക് സംശയമില്ല. തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അങ്ങനെ ഒരു സംഭാഷണം, ഞങ്ങളുടെയൊക്കെ ചിന്തയെ ഉണർത്തുന്ന ഒരു പ്രഭാഷണം ഇതിനുള്ള ഒരു നന്ദി സർവകലാശാലയുടെ ഭാഗത്തു നിന്ന് തന്നെ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ തന്നെ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു വേദാന്ത അധ്യാപക എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ തന്നെ ഞാൻ അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. കൂടുതലൊന്നും എനിക്ക് പറയാനില്ല. എൻഡോമെന്റ് വിതരണത്തിന്റെ സമയമാണ്. സർവകലാശാല വിവിധ എൻഡോമെന്റുകൾ ഓരോ വർഷവും വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് നൽകുന്നുണ്ട്. ഗവേഷകരുണ്ട്, UG വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുണ്ട്, PG വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ വലിയൊരു സന്തോഷമുണ്ട് സർവകലാശാലയ്ക്ക് ഈ ഒരു ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളെ കൂടി ഈ ആഘോഷത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമാക്കിക്കൊണ്ട്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എൻഡോമെന്റ് വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് സമ്മാനിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷം സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുന്നതിൽ അതുതന്നെയാണ് ഈ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ആഘോഷം അങ്ങനെ തന്നെയാണ് സാർത്ഥകമാകുന്നത് എന്ന് ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്നു. കൂടുതലൊന്നും സംസാരിക്കുന്നില്ല. അടുത്തത് എൻഡോമെന്റ് വിതരണമാണ്. അതിനുള്ള നടപടികളിലേക്ക് നമുക്ക് കടക്കാം.
ശ്രീ ശങ്കരാചാര്യ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി, സംസ്കൃത യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിലെ 14 എൻഡോമെന്റുകളാണ്, 22 എൻഡോമെന്റുകളാണ് ആകെ ഉള്ളത്. അതിൽ 14 എൻഡോമെന്റുകൾ വിവിധ രംഗങ്ങളിൽ, പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് അക്കാദമിക കലാരംഗങ്ങളിൽ മികവ് തെളിയിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് ഏർപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള എൻഡോമെന്റുകളാണ്. 8 എൻഡോമെന്റുകൾ വിവിധ പഠന വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ പ്രഭാഷണം ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള പ്രോഗ്രാം നടത്തുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടി നീക്കിവെച്ചിട്ടുള്ള എൻഡോമെന്റുകളാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ ഈ വേദിയിൽ വിവിധ അക്കാദമിക കലാരംഗങ്ങളിൽ മികവ് തെളിയിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് ഏർപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള എൻഡോമെന്റിന്റെ ക്യാഷ് വിതരണമാണ്. അതേപോലെ തന്നെ ക്യാഷ് പ്രൈസും അതേപോലെ തന്നെ സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റും വിതരണം ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ്. പേര് വിളിക്കുന്ന വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾ പെട്ടെന്ന് തന്നെ മുന്നോട്ട് വന്ന് ഏറ്റുവാങ്ങണം എന്ന് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുകയാണ്. പ്രൊഫസർ A. ബാലകൃഷ്ണ വാര്യർ മെമ്മോറിയൽ എൻഡോമെന്റ് 2022 വർഷത്തിലെ ബിരുദാനന്തര ബിരുദ അവസാന വർഷ പരീക്ഷയിലെ മലയാള വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന അവാർഡാണ്. ഇതിന് അർഹയായിട്ടുള്ളത് ആഷ്ലി ജോസ്, മലയാള വിഭാഗം, കൊയിലാണ്ടി പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. വിദ്യാർത്ഥിനി അസൗകര്യം അറിയിച്ചിരുന്നു, പറ്റില്ല എന്നുള്ള അസൗകര്യം അറിയിച്ചിരുന്നു. അത് പിന്നീട് നൽകുന്നതായിരിക്കും. ശ്രീ CM വിഷ്ണു നമ്പൂതിരി എൻഡോമെന്റ് 2022 വർഷത്തിലെ MPhil സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യം പരീക്ഷയിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. ആ എൻഡോമെന്റ് മാർക്ക് അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ നോക്കിയപ്പോൾ 8 വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് തുല്യ മാർക്ക് വന്നതിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ ആ സംഖ്യ തുല്യമായിട്ട് വീതിച്ചിട്ടാണ് നൽകാൻ തീരുമാനിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. അവരുടെ പേര് വിളിക്കാം. മുഴുവനും സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗത്തിലെ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളാണ്. കൃഷ്ണേന്ദു KV, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. വേഗം വരും കേട്ടോ. ആഷില ലാല KV, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. സുകന്യ VP, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. ജിജിലി KM, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. ആര്യ AK, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്, ഹരിത കെ കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്, വർഷ ഗോപി കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്, ജിംസൺ ആറൻ കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. അടുത്തത് വി ആർ വെങ്കടേശ്വരൻ മെമ്മോറിയൽ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2022 BA അവസാന വർഷ പരീക്ഷയിലെ സംസ്കൃതം വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. ഈ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റിന് അർഹയായിട്ടുള്ളത് ദേവിക കൃഷ്ണ പി, സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗം, കൊയിലാണ്ടി പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. അടുത്തത് വി ആർ വെങ്കടേശ്വരൻ മെമ്മോറിയൽ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് 2022 വർഷത്തിലെ MA അവസാന വർഷ പരീക്ഷയിലെ സംസ്കൃതം വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. ഇതും 2 പേർക്ക് വീതമാണ്, തുല്യമായിട്ട് വീതിച്ചിട്ടാണ് നൽകുന്നത്. പൗർണമി ഉണ്ണികൃഷ്ണൻ, സംസ്കൃത വ്യാകരണ വിഭാഗം, കാലടി കെ. സരസ്വത് കെ, സംസ്കൃത വ്യാകരണ വിഭാഗം, കേന്ദ്രം. സരസ്വത് കെയുടെ സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റും ക്യാഷ് അവാർഡ് കൂടി പൗർണമി ഉണ്ണികൃഷ്ണനെ വാങ്ങുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടി ചുമതലപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഡോക്ടർ MS മേനോൻ മെമ്മോറിയൽ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2022 വർഷത്തിലെ 1ാം സെമസ്റ്റർ MA സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ് ഇത്. അതിന് അർഹയായിട്ടുള്ളത് ദേവിക കൃഷ്ണ പി, സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗം, കൊയിലാണ്ടി പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. അടുത്തുകൂടി വിളിക്കുകയാണ് പ്രൊഫസർ N ഗോപാലപിള്ള മെമ്മോറിയൽ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2022 വർഷത്തിലെ BA സംസ്കൃത വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തും സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യത്തിൽ ബിരുദാനന്തര ബിരുദത്തിന് തുടർന്ന് പഠിക്കുന്നതുമായി വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റും ദേവിക കൃഷ്ണ പി, സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യം, കൊയിലാണ്ടി പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. അടുത്തത് പണ്ഡിറ്റ് PS സുബ്രാമ പട്ടർ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2022 MA സംസ്കൃതത്തിലെ 5 വകുപ്പുകളിൽ പ്രവേശനം ലഭിക്കുന്നതിന് ബിരുദ പരീക്ഷയിൽ ലഭിച്ച മാർക്കിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റുകളാണ്. സംസ്കൃതത്തിലെ 5 പഠന വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നുള്ള കുട്ടികൾക്കാണ് നൽകുന്നത്. സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ദേവിക കൃഷ്ണ പി, കൊയിലാണ്ടി പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. സംസ്കൃത വ്യാകരണ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ആരതി അനിൽ, പയ്യന്നൂർ പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. സംസ്കൃത വേദാന്ത വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് മാളവിക M, കാലടി മുഖ്യ കേന്ദ്രം. അറിയിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്, എത്താൻ സാധിക്കാത്ത അറിയിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. സംസ്കൃത വേദാന്ത വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഗാഥ താമരശ്ശേരി, പന്മന പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. സംസ്കൃത ജനറൽ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് അരുണിമ S കർത്ത, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. സംസ്കൃത ന്യായ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ന്യൂഫി ജോൺ, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. അടുത്ത എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ഡോക്ടർ T ആര്യദേവി എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2022 MA അവസാന വർഷ പരീക്ഷയിലെ സംസ്കൃത ന്യായ വിഭാഗത്തിൽ 1ാം സ്ഥാനത്തുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. അത് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് സംസ്കൃതം ന്യായ വിഭാഗത്തിലെ ഗോപിക SU, തിരുവനന്തപുരം പ്രാദേശിക കേന്ദ്രം. അറിയിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്, വരാൻ യോഗം അറിയിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. അടുത്തതായി ശ്രീ CM വിഷ്ണു നമ്പൂതിരി എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് ആണ്. 2021 MPhil സംസ്കൃതം സാഹിത്യം പരീക്ഷയിൽ ഒന്നാം സ്ഥാനം ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്ക് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. അതിന് അർഹതയായിട്ടുള്ളത് അമൃത AR, സംസ്കൃത സാഹിത്യ വിഭാഗം, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. അടുത്തത് ഡോക്ടർ MS രാജശേഖരൻ എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. മാർഗനിർദ്ദേശ പ്രകാരമുള്ള പഠന വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും ഏറ്റവും മികച്ച PhD പ്രബന്ധത്തിന് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ് ഡോക്ടർ S രാജശേഖരൻ എൻഡോമെന്റ്. അത് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് സംസ്കൃത വേദാന്ത വിഭാഗത്തിലെ ഡോക്ടർ മുരളീകൃഷ്ണൻ MP ആണ്, കാലടി മുഖ്യകേന്ദ്രം. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ PhD ടോപ്പിക് ക്രിട്ടിക്കൽ എഡിഷൻ ആൻഡ് സ്റ്റഡി ഓഫ് മാതൃസദ്ഭാവ. അടുത്തതായി കലാതിലകം കലാപ്രതിഭ എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. 2021-22 വർഷത്തിൽ നടന്ന സർവകലാശാല കലോത്സവത്തിലെ കലാതിലകം കലാപ്രതിഭ വിജയികൾക്കുള്ള എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. അതിൽ കലാപ്രതിഭ ആയിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥിക്കുള്ള പുരസ്കാരമാണ് ഇവിടെ നൽകുന്നത്. കലാതിലകത്തിന് ആള് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല എന്നാണ് അറിയിച്ചിരുന്നത്. അത് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് അനന്തു സച്ചി, അനന്തു സച്ചിയാണ്, ഭരതനാട്യം ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ്, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. ഡോക്ടർ സുവർണ നാലപ്പാട്ട് പുരസ്കാരം മാർഗനിർദ്ദേശ പ്രകാരമുള്ള പഠന വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും ഏറ്റവും മികച്ച PhD പ്രബന്ധത്തിന് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോമെന്റ് ആണ്. അത് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് ഡോക്ടർ രതീഷ് P, കാലടി മുഖ്യകേന്ദ്രം, മലയാള വിഭാഗം. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ PhD വിഷയം കർഷക പ്രസ്ഥാനത്തിന്റെ സാഹിത്യ സാംസ്കാരിക സംഭാവനകൾ, ഉത്തര കേരളത്തെ മുൻനിർത്തി ഒരു അന്വേഷണം. ഡോക്ടർ S രാജശേഖരൻ എൻഡോമെന്റ് മാർഗനിർദ്ദേശ പ്രകാരം ഉള്ള പഠന വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും ഏറ്റവും മികച്ച PhD പ്രബന്ധത്തിന് നൽകുന്ന എൻഡോമെന്റ് തന്നെയാണ് ഇതും. അത് ലഭിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത് ഡോക്ടർ ശ്രീകേഷ് MK, സംസ്കൃത വ്യാകരണ വിഭാഗം, കാലടി ക്യാമ്പസ്. ഇതോടുകൂടി എൻഡോമെന്റിന്റെ വിതരണം അവസാനിക്കുകയാണ്. എൻഡോമെന്റിൽ പങ്കെടുത്തിട്ടുള്ള ലഭ്യമായിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥികള് കാര്യം ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുക, അവിടെ പ്രത്യേകം രജിസ്റ്റർ വെച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്, അതെല്ലാവരും സൈൻ ചെയ്യണം. എൻഡോമെന്റ് വാങ്ങിയിട്ടുള്ള വിജയികളായിട്ടുള്ള മുഴുവൻ വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളെയും അഭിനന്ദിക്കുന്നു. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ എൻഡോമെന്റുകൾ സർവകലാശാലയിൽ ഏർപ്പെടുത്താൻ സന്മനസ് കാണിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള വ്യക്തികളെയും കുടുംബങ്ങളെയും സ്ഥാപനങ്ങളെയും സർവകലാശാലയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടി നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുക.
സംസാരിക്കുകയായി പ്രോഗ്രാം കമ്മിറ്റി ജനറൽ കൺവീനർ ജനറൽ വിഭാഗം അസിസ്റ്റന്റ് പ്രൊഫസറുമായ ഡോക്ടർ ശ്രീ ജിയെ സ്നേഹപൂർവ്വം ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു.
വേദിയിലും സദസ്സിലുമുള്ള എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. എല്ലാവർക്കും ശങ്കര ജയന്തി ദിന ആശംസകളും അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. പുറത്ത് മഴ പെയ്യണത് പോലെ തന്നെ ഉള്ളിൽ ഒരു മഴ പെയ്യാണ്. കാരണം സാറിൻ്റെ ഒരു ടോക്ക് കേട്ട് കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോ ആർട്ട് എന്താണ്, വാട്ട് ദേ മെന്റ് ബൈ ആർട്ട് എന്നുള്ള ചിന്തയാണ് ഉള്ളിൽ കിടക്കുന്നത്. കാരണം ആർട്ടിന്റെ ഒരു കൗണ്ടർ പാർട്ടായിട്ടാണ് കല എന്ന് ഇതുവരെ മനസ്സിലാക്കിക്കൊണ്ടിരുന്നത്. പക്ഷെ രണ്ടും ഡിഫറെന്റ് ആണ് എന്നൊരു തോന്നൽ എവിടേക്കോ വരുന്നുണ്ട്. എന്താ പറയാ, ഒരു കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് എക്സ്പ്രഷൻ ആണ് ആർട്ട് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ കല എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു എറ്റിമോളജി നമ്മൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കിയിട്ടുള്ളത് കംലാദീതി കല എന്നാണ്. that which gives happiness, that which brings happiness എന്ന അർത്ഥത്തിലാണ്. ഇങ്ങനെ നോക്കുമ്പോൾ അവിടെ എവിടെയാ ഒരു കോൺഫ്ലിക്റ്റിനുള്ള സ്ഥാനം എന്നാണ് ചിന്തിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നത്. സാറ് പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് വന്നത് കണ്ടംപററി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ക്രിയേറ്റിവിറ്റിയോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ക്രിയേഷനെ കുറിച്ചിട്ടാണ് പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നത്. അവിടെ ആ ഒരു എക്സ്പ്രഷൻ, everyone has the right to express themselves. ശരിയാണ്. അത് കഴിഞ്ഞ് അവസാനം സാറ് കണ്ട നിർത്തിയത് അത് ആ കലയായിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ ഇരുന്നോട്ടെ, അക്സെപ്റ്റ് ഇറ്റ് എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ഭാരതത്തിന്റെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു കലയിൽ നമ്മൾ ഭാരതീയത അന്വേഷിച്ചപ്പോൾ ആ ഒരു യൂണിവേഴ്സാലിറ്റി തന്നെ അല്ലേ നമ്മൾക്കും ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നത്. ആ ഒരു ചിന്തയിൽ തൽക്കാലം സ്വസ്ഥമായിട്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഒട്ടവരിറ്റീസ് ഇവിടെ ഓരോ ഡിസിപ്ലിനിലും ഉള്ളവർക്ക് ടീച്ചർ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ, മുത്തലക്ഷ്മി ടീച്ചർ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ഓരോ ഡിസിപ്ലിനിലും ഉള്ളവർക്ക് ചിന്തിക്കാൻ ധാരാളം ഇട്ട് തന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു ടോക്ക് തന്നതില് ശ്രീശങ്കര ആനുവൽ ലെക്ചർ അർത്ഥകമാകും വിധത്തില് ഒരു ടോക്ക് ഇവിടെ അവതരിപ്പിച്ചതില് ശങ്കരാചാര്യ സർവകലാശാലയുടെ പേരിലുള്ള എല്ലാ നന്ദിയും സാറിനെ അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. അതുപോലെ നമ്മളുടെ പരിപാടി തുടങ്ങിയത് സംഗീത സഭയോട് കൂടിയാണ്. മ്യൂസിക് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റിലെ കുട്ടികളെ നല്ല ഭംഗിയായിട്ട് ഇവിടെ അത് അവതരിപ്പിച്ചു. ഞങ്ങൾ പോയി എന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. ടീച്ചർക്കും കുട്ടികൾക്കും എല്ലാവർക്കും അതിനുള്ള നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുകയാണ്. അതിനുശേഷം ഇവിടെ സ്വാഗതം അറിയിച്ച നമ്മളുടെ ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട രജിസ്ട്രാർ ഗോപാലകൃഷ്ണൻ സർ ഈ ഒരു ടോക്കിന് ഒരു ഇൻട്രോഡക്ടറി നോട്ട് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഭൂമിക ഇവിടെ അവതരിപ്പിച്ച ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ നാരായണൻ സർ, സാറിനും നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുന്നു. നമ്മുടെ ശങ്കര ജയന്തി മെസ്സേജ് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ശങ്കര കൃതികളെ കുറിച്ചും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവിടുത്തെ ആ ഒരു എന്താ പറയാ അവിടുത്തെ ഒരു തത്വശാസ്ത്രത്തിന്റെ ഒരു മഹത്വത്തെ കുറിച്ചും ഒക്കെ ഇവിടെ പറഞ്ഞ ടീച്ചർ നമ്മുടെ പ്രോ വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ, അതുപോലെ എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് അവാർഡ് നൽകുകയും ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തതിന് ടീച്ചർക്കുമുള്ള നന്ദി അറിയിക്കുന്നു. അപ്പം എൻഡോവ്മെന്റ് സ്വീകരിക്കാൻ ഇവിടെ വന്നിട്ടുള്ള വിദ്യാർത്ഥികൾ, ഐ കൺഗ്രാറ്റുലേറ്റ് ദം ആൻഡ് ഓൾസോ ദ പാരന്റ്സ് ഫോർ ദ സപ്പോർട്ട്. ഈ ഓൺലൈൻ പ്ലാറ്റ്ഫോമിൽ കുറച്ച് പേരുണ്ട്. ഇവിടെ എത്തി ആയിട്ടുള്ള പ്രൊഫസേഴ്സ് ഉണ്ട്, സിൻഡിക്കേറ്റ് സാറുണ്ട്. അവർക്കും അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ഭാഷയിൽ നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. ഇനി നമ്മളുടെ ഓർഗനൈസിംഗ് കമ്മിറ്റി അവരുടെ അടുത്ത് പറഞ്ഞില്ലെങ്കിൽ ശരിയാവില്ല. അവർക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും നന്ദി പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് നിർത്തുന്നു. നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം.